so one thing that kind of concerns me when we look at the state of agile or agility in organizations these days is that I have a little bit of a fear that it's actually rapidly getting into just another management fad. You can see that by the many fake, if you want, sort of fake agile implementations that are out there, where organizations and their teams, they go through the rituals, the rhythms, the motions, the daily stand-ups, you name it. They have Kanban boards everywhere, and they work in sprints and all these things. But when you go a little bit deeper, there's actually not a lot of what has actually changed and how they underlying think about work. And that's a major issue, because if you don't change the underlying thinking, then you can put in all the tools and methods and fancy things you want. Nothing's really changing, and you won't get the benefits. To give you an example, maybe we've done some research with about 150 Swiss companies, and we basically interviewed C-level people, board level people, and then 2 or 3 levels below down in the organization. And obviously, as you would expect, like 85% of the C-level people would go like, yeah, obviously we have to go agile, and it's very important these days, and digital and everything, and agile and so on. And obviously they also felt very competent in sort of being the ones that are capable and competent to sort of run those agile transformations, both at the C-level and at the board level. But when you go down 2 or 3 levels below in the organization, you get a very different picture. People see all these things being shoved down their throats. You see the methods and the new terminology that's being brought in mainly by outside consultants. But there's quite a bit of cynicism as well that you see, because they do get that nothing's really changing, in the way they work. They tell you things like, management says they want all these things, but they don't really want it, and because they really don't follow up with it. Just to give you, maybe one example, is one of the very, very big Swiss banks. I won't name the name, but easy to figure out if you want to. They're currently hiring tons of design thinkers and scrum masters and agile coaches and all sorts of things. But it's that very organization that on the one hand for like 5 or 6 years has done nothing else of strategic importance that is besides cost cutting. Now agile is not really about cost cutting in my view. And at the same time, the new CEO, who's currently still the CEO, when he took over after his first 100 days, he went to a big investors conference and he was talking about how he's going to turn around the bank. And he actually here in London, he gave a presentation with 67 slides. And not on a single one of those slides, you can still look it up, it's still up on the internet, not on a single one of those slides the word customer ever appeared. So tons of ratios and financial metrics and so on and so forth. And that's the very same bank that says we're now going agile. It just doesn't fit, and people are not stupid in those organizations. So I'm really concerned, because we see more and more of that it's actually lots of fake agile out there, mainly driven by some of the big consultancies actually, I think. Maybe that's unpopular to say, but I do see some of the big consultancies that see, well, there's a lot of money to be made in selling agile transformations. And when they themselves and their clients that they have historically been successful with are not really, what you would call agile. So it's really coming down to this whole idea of not thinking about how work really has to be different, and what makes work or makes work, or what doesn't make work in that sense. It reminds me a little bit of cargo cults. You know what cargo cults are? So it's kind of like copying things that are outwardly visible without really changing anything that's on the inside that's not visible, or even lacking a complete understanding of what on the inside is not visible. What I see a lot when I work with my clients is, these days everybody can tell you what their business model is. Everybody can do that. Here's how we basically create value for customers, and here's how we make money, and so on. So they can tell you that. When you go one step deeper and you say, so that's your business model, but that's only going to get you so far. You need an organization that can execute that model, that can innovate new business models at the same time. And so you need an organization that works, that performs. So how do you run that organization? What's your management model really? That's what the question is getting at. So when you ask managers, how do you get the work of management done? What's the work of management to make work productive and people achieving really, right? So how do you do that? you get blank stares and panic attacks. They don't know really even, what they're doing and why they're doing it this way and not that way. That means there's a basic lack of thinking about what are some of the underlying assumptions of how we structure work in our modern organizations. Just to give you two examples that are not being questioned, not in practice and not by management educators as well, is first and foremost this notion of the organization as a machine, right? Which is basically at the heart of what we call the command and control type of stuff. So and that kind of manifests itself in many ways. One is to actually separate the work from the decision about the work. So one is on the people level, so you have the kind of higher echelons, the C-level guys who make all the decisions, and then they ask the organization to execute, and you still have that. And that's contrary to sort of the basic principles that Agile is actually based on. So you still have that. And then the second way you separate work from the decisions about work is through targets and metrics and budgets and stuff like that. So you use budgets or any other sort of typically cost-related type of targets to sort of try and make decisions about where you allocate resources and which projects you do and stuff like that. And that has nothing to do with the work itself, the work for the customer, how we create value for the customer. And again, that kind of has to end up with, when you don't sort of fundamentally reconsider and rethink these things, that has to end up when you just put on some sort of method from the outside, you're not going to get the results that you're actually hoping for. And that will then create a lot of cynicism and a lot of, among the people in the organization. And the C-level at some point will say, well, okay, we tried Agile, doesn't work, so let's move on to sort of the next fad. And that's really sad, because I do think there's an awful lot of hidden potential in organizations that methods, and less the methods, but actually the thinking and the principles and the mindsets behind Agile, or just in general, thinking about how does work actually work? How can we make it more productive, more fulfilling for people? There's so much potential hidden in organizations that we're not setting free. And this Agile now going mainstream in that way, I'm a little bit afraid will come back to haunt us and not fulfill its many promises. Well, the actual best practice, I think, is, if you ask me, and I have to say I'm not really an Agile in that sense expert, even though I come from the from the IT part of the business originally. But I think the real best practice is those organizations that don't put up all the posters and stuff and go big Agile and stuff, but actually seriously think about the way work works, the way they think about work, the way they enable their people who show up every morning who want to do good work. So what can we do that they can actually use their full potential and use their full experience? For me, one perfect example is again, I'm from Switzerland, so I'm using another Swiss example, is, you may have heard of them, is On Running. On is a no longer quite startup, but actually pretty interesting company that's shaking up the global running shoe business. So they're really putting the scares into the likes of Nike and Adidas and Puma and so on and so forth. They're really successful. And they, from the start, they're now like a global organization. They're not too big, they have 700 people or so. But they're from the start, they really thought hard about how do we not just differentiate in terms of the kind of shoes that we produce, but also how we work as an organization. And they really go deep, and they really want to make work as productive, as pleasant, as enjoyable as possible for their people. They don't use all those labels, but if you look at what they actually do under the hood, you could argue that they're probably one of the most agile organizations out there, which enables them not just to be quick, in things like, for instance, they they're really big in the sport of triathlon. So 2 years ago at the Ironman World Championship in Kona, there was a guy, Tim Don is one of their athletes. He went in as the world record holder in the Ironman distance, and he got into a crash 2 days before the race, and he couldn't race, and he almost lost his life. He was almost paralyzed, so he broke his neck, and a really terrible accident. And they were sort of really, getting ready to sort of benefit of that potentially tremendous performance that this guy is going to put out in that race, and then he couldn't race. So what did they do? Within 48 hours, they put together a film crew, sent them over to Kona, and basically made this into a documentary, how he would, and they didn't know that would happen at the time, how he would, go through that accident and then recover slowly and be healed. And it was a tremendous story of like an 8 month sort of recovery period that they managed to sort of leverage as, again, showing that they're different than anybody else. And it's a wonderful documentary. It's out there on their website. It's on YouTube. It's on Vimeo. You can look at that. It's called The Man with the Halo, how Tim Don recovers from that really, really terrible crash. And organizations like that are able to do these things without having to go through the hoops of, tons of... That wasn't planned, and you couldn't guarantee a result because you wouldn't know whether the guy would actually get well again and so on and so forth. But because it's in their DNA really to work that way and to see opportunity where there are and to be able to sort of quickly respond and not having to go through all sorts of, but the budget doesn't have room for this because obviously nobody knew. So when you think that way, then these things are possible. And so maybe that was a long explanation for best practice, but it's really going at that deeper level in terms of, really thinking about work and making work better for everybody involved.